This Black History Month, join Queens Public Library as we celebrate African Americans and the arts. From the birth of blues and jazz to the heights of the Harlem Renaissance, hip-hop, Afrofuturism, and more, Black art has had a significant impact on our nation, our culture, and our world. Pick up a copy of our African Americans and the Arts Journal at your local library and browse our book lists, all ages programs, and much more at queenslib.org/BHM 2024. Lunar New Year is a tradition for welcoming a fresh start to the new year, as well as for honoring ancestors. We invite everyone to enjoy our book recommendations and join us for special programs, including traditional music, crafts, and more, celebrating the Year of the Dragon. Learn more at queenslib.org/Lunar New Year 24. What's your favorite thing to do at the library? Get creative and show us. Enter our 7th annual Share Your Love for Queens Public Library photo contest from February 1st through February 29th. For more information, visit queenslib.org/Library Lovers 2024.
Welcome to Queens Public Library Culture Connection, curated by Daniel Zaleski and now in its 10th year at the Queens Public Library. It's proud to present international artists from emerging talent to award-winning masters. These disciplines include music, theater, author talks, and film. And now expanding into a virtual format, Culture Connection is currently reaching a global audience. This evening's talk is with Jonathan Escoffery, author of the national best-selling debut fiction, If I Survive You, published in 2022 by MCD Picador at Frau Strauss in Giroux. Maureen Corrigan of NPR's Fresh Air says not since Moby Dick has the all-American ethos of sink or swim on your own been dramatized to such devastating effect. If I Survive You is an extraordinary debut collection, an intensely granular yet panoramic depiction of what it's like to try to make it or not in this kaleidoscopic madhouse of a country. A ravishing debut, says Katie Waldman from The New Yorker, and the Today Show says Escoffery's debut is nothing short of breathtaking, an instant classic. And If I Could Survive You has been shortlisted for several prizes, including the 2023 Booker Prize, the PEN/Faulkner Award, and the Gordon Byrne Prize, and nominated for just about every literary prize possible, including the National Book Award for Fiction, National Book Critics Circle, Carnegie Medal of Excellence in Fiction, International Dublin Literary Prize, and named a Best Book of the Year by Time and People magazine, and over 20 other publications, including The New Yorker, NPR, Oprah Daily, the Los Angeles Times, and Boston Globe, to name a few. Hello.
Hey,
My name is David Santos Donaldson, and I'll be hosting this evening's interview and conversation with Jonathan. And my novel was published in Greenland, published by Amistad HarperCollins in 2022. Now, I've had plays commissioned by the Public Theater, and besides being a playwright and an author, I'm currently a practicing psychotherapist. My writing has appeared in various publications, including Literary Hub, Electric Literature, The Rumpus, Shelf Awareness, Poets and Writers magazine, and the German literary magazine Geistesblüten. Jonathan Escoffery is the recipient of the 2020 Plimpton Prize for Fiction, the 2020 National Endowment of the Arts Literature Fellowship, and the 2020 Ask Me Award for Fiction. His fiction has appeared in the Paris Review, American Short Fiction, Prairie Schooner, Agni, Passages North, Zizava, and the Electric Literature, and has been anthologized by the American magazine Writing. He is a fellow in the University of Southern California's PhD Creative Writing Literature Program, and in 2021, he was awarded the Wallace Stegner Fellowship from Stanford University. He was raised in Miami, Florida, and If I Survive You is his first book. I am pleased to introduce to you all Jonathan Escoffery. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you, David. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. Thank you for doing this with me.
Oh man, it is my pleasure. As you know, I've been wanting an opportunity to talk to you, and we've chatted back and forth through various modalities, and it's great to have an opportunity to talk to you. And I also wanted to, because I haven't officially said this to your face, at least not even virtually. Congratulations, man! This is I love this book. I'm obviously not alone, but I read it early on last year or a year when our books first came out, and I knew I just read it right away, and I'm like, this reads like an instant classic. So I felt very validated when the Today Show said the same thing. Congratulations, man.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
So, Jonathan, to the few people out there who have not yet read this amazing book, can you tell us a little bit about what If I Survive You is about?
Yeah, I mean, it's about a lot of things, but I think the core of it is a family of Jamaicans wind up emigrating to Miami, Florida in the late 1970s. And it's there that they have their their second son, their first and only American-born son. And that son is kind of trying to figure out what to do with himself in terms of how he relates to his Jamaicanness, how he relates to his Americanness, how he fits within the family dynamic, how he fits within the context of a city like Miami, such a multicultural city, and then, the greater context of the United States. And he's having a really rough time of it. And he winds up having a falling out with his father, who kicks him out of the house. He winds up living out of his car for a great deal of the book. And he winds up taking a bunch of really strange jobs or gigs that challenge his personal ethics and sense of morality and a lot of other things. And also, continue to ask of him, who are you, and what kind of person are you, and what kind of man are you going to be in the world?
Yeah, thank you. There's really so much in this book, and I know it's being a novelist myself. I know it's one of the hardest things is to like sum up your book in a few sentences, because if you want to know what the book is about, you've already worked on 300 pages of it. It's like, this is what it's about. So thank you for doing that. I know it's hard, and we have to learn to do these things. So hey, did you know that today is Groundhog Day?
I had no idea. Do we get more? We're supposed to learn if we get more winter or not.
Yeah, you haven't heard the news?
I have
no. So the news is we got a shorter winter. Says what's his name? Totsahani something. I don't know.
Okay, I'm happy for all of the people who are experiencing the harsher winters.
Because you're out in California, right?
California, yeah.
Yeah, right. Well, the reason I brought up Groundhog Day is not to be silly or trivial, but nothing wrong with being silly and trivial. But Groundhog Day. So there's a lot to get into the book, but before that, being a debut author and then having the great fortune and luck to get really well received and then be set upon on this crazy task of going out now and presenting yourself, giving talks, answering questions, going on podcasts, going, interview after interview. I consider myself lucky also, and I know a little bit of what this is like, and it starts to feel a little bit like Groundhog Day. The movie Groundhog Day, where
Yeah.
it's like repeating the same thing day after day.
Over and over and over.
Exactly. And you're getting the same questions over and over, and you're giving the same answers. And eventually you start I feel guilty of this ridiculous thing of quoting myself. Like, oh yeah, who said that? Oh, I said in the last interview the same thing over and over. Right. And it gets a little, I wouldn't say tiresome, because, we're lucky and happy to be in this position.
Right.
But it is get to a point that you sometimes say, well, I've said everything I need to say. I've been asked everything that I could possibly say about this book. What is it like for you to have all this success? And you've got, you've taken the literary world by storm with your debut novel. I know it didn't come out of, I know it didn't happen overnight, and we can talk about that later too, but it's been, since your debut, it's been quite a skyrocket into the public arena. What's it like for you to have to go through these interviews time after time, and to deal with all of the world of being a published and lauded author?
I mean, you hit the nail on the head in terms of a little bit of the Groundhog Day feeling of it, but you also, it was well put that we're both very lucky to be in that position in the first place. I think, I had an early reviewer, or it wasn't a review, it was an interviewer who told me, we spoke before the book came out, and she said, get some rest now, because you're going to be, she predicted what was going to happen. She said, you're going to be busy for a while. And I think that's really the key, is to continue to sneak in the rest as much as possible.
Yeah.
I think it's a hard thing when you're on the road. Like last month, I was on the road for like 3 out of 4 weeks. You forget what home feels like, what your bed feels like, what your apartment might look like. Yeah. And that could be difficult. But then the wonderful thing is that, I've more and more, I'm meeting authors who I really admire, and winding up, on panels with them, or in the same spaces as them. And they've read my book, and that's crazy to me. Like, I never even, even as you're getting like the good buzz, and you're getting the good reviews and all these different things, it's like when you meet people you really, admire, who inspire you to do your own writing, and they tell you that you're inspiring them right back. I mean, that's the dream, I think, and that keeps it fresh. I don't think I get tired of that kind of thing.
Yeah, and so. But it seems like, from the outside looking at you, you seem like you're taking it all pretty much in stride. I was listening to an interview by, I think Laura Worrell, right?
Yeah.
Laura? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and she has a great book, The Sweet, Soft, Plenty Rhythm, that this year has also came out the same year that our books came out, and has been getting great recognition and some nominations. But she nailed it for me, and I sort of messaged her. We talked about this a little bit. She nailed the phrase for me and what it's like for her. She says it's like you're sort of balancing. What does she say? Straddling joy and anxiety. Mm-hmm. And I could totally relate to that. But maybe I'm just more neurotic than you. You seem. Has it been at all difficult for you?
Yeah, it's been at all. Yeah, it's been very difficult at times. Just trying to keep up with things. Just I'm a big reader. I'm obviously a writer. That's why I'm here. Yeah. And you can just really burn out, I think. I've had probably more than one burnout moment, since 2022.
Yeah,
It's felt like I've been on book tour for over a year now, in a sense, and that's coming to a bit of a close, thankfully, so I can get started on the next thing, or get
right.
further along in the next project. But I appreciate you saying that it looks as though I'm managing well. Because yeah, I have more than moments, but
Yeah,
remembering, that we asked for this.
you asked for it, you got it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It helps to remember that. And if I haven't said congratulations to you, on your
Oh, sure.
wonderful
Thank
debut.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thanks for being so supportive to me too. You've been there, not rearing. What's the word? Cheering me on there.
Yeah,
Thank you.
for sure.
Thank you. So, we're here obviously because you've written a book, and not just written a book, but you've written I would say a great book. I really do believe that. And you're a writer. So the question I have for you now is, and you've been writing for a long time, right?
Yeah, it feels like a long time. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I heard you say somewhere that you've been writing since you were like 10 years old.
Yeah, for sure. It wasn't good at 10 years old. It wasn't
Well,
readable by anyone who didn't, love me. But yeah,
you
I've
still
been
had a
going.
writer identity since then, since
Yeah,
kid.
yeah. A lot of writers. I mean, I'm sure you'll have heard this, and I don't know where you fit within the question of this, but some writers come to owning the identity of writer, or the label, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
That writer identity, it's difficult for a lot of people to claim, for a number of reasons that I understand. I've heard from people where their books came out, and they're still struggling with owning that. I
yeah,
never I never had that particular problem. I just felt like I was a writer.
yeah,
Um, but I had a lot of wonderful, humbling moments along the way,
yeah,
learning moments and all of that really, taught me how much real work and study goes into, making something that, you hope will stand the test of time.
yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, and I can, I hear what you're saying. A lot of people struggle with the idea of like saying I'm an artist, I'm a writer, and I'm with you. I kind of knew from a young age. In fact, probably worse than your 10-year-old. At 12 years old, I wrote an entire novel, an espionage novel called The Bombs, and it was horrible. And I still have it in that cabinet over there. But but my question for you is, why? Why do you write?
Oh God. Yeah.
Hey, we're not doing Groundhog Day, so you're not getting the same old questions. Maybe
Why
it's
do you write?
a
Yeah.
for you, but it's
Good
something
question.
I'm seriously curious about.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. There's never one answer, but you write because you can't imagine not writing. I know for me, I write to remember. I've got
Hmm.
a terrible memory in general, and so connecting with ideas, both in terms of memory, things that have happened in my life, stories that I've been told, through people who are close to me, including my family, documenting. History in a sense, and especially lesser known histories, or histories that the power structures may not actually want you to be recording. That's a big reason for it. And then getting into the flow, when you're really deep into a project where your imagination becomes essentially as real to you as things that are happening in the external world outside of your brain.
Yeah,
Those characters become real to you, when their problems become real to you, and you are as excited to get back to the page as you are to do anything else in life. I mean, that moment, that is where the the energy and the joy, I think, really speaks to me anyway. I know it's we've been talking a bit about like what's it like to debut as an author and to
Yeah,
be, perceived as finding some success as an author, but it's that writer self that locates the beautiful thing that you're working on the page, and those moments of I don't know, just clear thought. I think there's nothing quite like it.
absolutely. Do you know there's a little book that Annie Dillard wrote about writing called The Writing Life? Have you ever checked it out? It's really,
I know it. I don't know that specific book, no. But
yeah,
I know Dillard, yeah.
it's a really. I mean, I just picked it up the other day, just to look. I mean, I have it at home, and read it years ago. And I was looking at it, and it's so interesting. She was talking. It's just beautiful. It's a beautiful little book. It's like, it's inspirational too. If you're stuck at all or wondering why you're doing this, it really reminds you. So it's good to check out. But she talks about the Herculean task of actually writing a first draft or writing at all. That you sort of need. It's to summon superhuman strengths and ability. It's not an ordinary thing. And she goes on and on describing about how like if you were to like be a Zulu warrior and drum for like weeks, or if you were an Aztec goddess and you had made all sacrifices, it would take all of that for you to just begin to start writing. And then she said, but if you're not a Zulu warrior or an Aztec maiden, how do you prepare yourself all alone to enter that extraordinary state on an ordinary morning? What sets you spinning? So what sets you spinning, Jonathan? What is it in you that gets you to do this crazy Herculean thing that we do day after day?
Wow. I'm trying to think what superpower I would need to steal from some other society
Right.
or whatnot. I steal from the poets. I mean, that's what I do.
Yeah.
I try to, especially when I'm in the flow. I mean, I don't want to lie to, in case people who I know are watching this and suggest that I was up this morning working on my fiction. I was not. I was working on some writing, but like review type of things. But when I'm deep in a project, when I'm not doing so much traveling and all of that, I really like to read before bed. You have the moments where you read another author and any number of thoughts can come to your mind. But for me, it reminds me why my endeavors to write and create are important. And sometimes I read something and I'm just floored and I think, wow, I want to be on that level. I want to attempt, the Jonathan Escoffery version of this kind of like this level of writing.
Yeah, sure.
And every once in a while you read something that's not so great and you're just like, wow, like this book was still published. And this is like, you need to get your butt up in the morning and write your stuff. Your stuff needs to be out in the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not to conflate publications and writing, but I like the words themselves, they really inspire me. And then but sometimes you write something and it's like, well, that seemed like a really great idea in my head, and it comes out as kind of dead on arrival. The language is dead, and the idea that you thought was clever is kind of dead. And that's why I say I'd steal from the poets, because just picking up, a random poetry collection that I tend to keep some by the computer, where I write. Poets tend to pay such close, careful attention to word choice and all, rhythm, musicality, and all of these things.
Yeah.
And that can really set me spinning.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your book. So your book starts off with a particular question. And sort of for me, I think this question sort of sets the entire work into motion. And immediately when I read this question and I opened the book, I was like, oh yeah, well, this book is for me. This book, you're writing, you're talking to me, Jonathan. Thank you. But it's so rare that I read a book that I think, oh, this author is talking specifically to me. Like this offers, in other words, saying what I would want to say or think about. So you rarely hear this question examined, and definitely not as artfully as you do or thoroughly as you do. And instead of me saying what this question is, I'm going to ask you to please read a little bit of the opening of the book so that our audience can also get a taste of what you're saying, and also sort of as a launch pad to continue to talk about it.
I would be delighted to.
Thank you.
So, as David mentioned, I'm going to read from the beginning of the book, which introduces this question that my main character, Trelawney, I suppose is dealing with, is one way to put it, or another way to put it is that he's accosted by this question. But anyway, you'll hear what I mean. It begins with, "What are you?" hollered from the perimeter of your front yard when you're 9, younger, probably. You'll be asked again throughout junior high and high school, then out in the world, in strip clubs, in food courts, over the phone, and at various menial jobs. The askers are expectant. They demand immediate gratification. Their question lifts you slightly off your pre-adolescent toes, tilting you, not just because you don't understand it, but because even if you did understand this question, you wouldn't yet have an answer. Perhaps it starts with, "What language is your mother speaking?" This might be the genesis, not because it comes first, but because at least on this occasion, you have some context for the question when it arrives. You immediately resent this question. "Why's your mother talk so funny?" your neighbor insists. Your mother calls to you from the front porch, has called from this perch overlooking the sloping yard since you were allowed to join the neighborhood kids and play. Always the signals that playtime is over. Only now, shame has latched itself to the ritual. Perhaps you'd hoped no one would ever notice. Perhaps you'd never noticed it yourself. Perhaps you ask in shallow protest, "What do you mean, what language?" Maybe you only think it. Ultimately, you mutter, "English. She's speaking English," before going inside, head tucked in embarrassment. In this moment, for the first time, you are ashamed of your mother, and you are ashamed of yourself for not defending her. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Beautiful.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. So in this first story that sets up the book, you've titled this first story "In Flux," and for me, this story sort of has all the themes that are later, that sort of, it has all the seeds that flower later on throughout the entire book. You have family dynamics, father-son relationships, forces of nature, sexuality, the absurdities of the constructs of race, but also the constructs of like manhood. You have class issues, work for survival. It's all there. And you chose to title this story "In Flux." Can you tell me about what that title, how you came up with that title, and what that means for you, that phrase "in flux"?
Well, we follow Trelawney as he is adapting to this question. He's trying to figure out what a suitable answer will be in the eyes of the people who are demanding to know, "What are you? What is he?" as they phrase it. That very poorly phrased question that many of us have been asked. And at different times, he's adapting to different possibilities. And so at certain points, he's thinking, well, this is the answer. X is the answer that is going to satisfy this question. And then, it might satisfy it for a little while, but then here these voices come again, negating his assertion and his claim to a specific identity. Part of the book, he's in that earlier section, he's dealing with the fact that people are saying they can't understand his mother's Jamaican accent. And he himself is trying to embrace as a young kid, this sense of Americanness that he's been indoctrinated with by his school. You know, America, the greatest country on earth, and all of that stuff that is said to us.
Yeah.
And but then at the same time, he's getting messages that maybe he's not the ideal American kid, and so he searches elsewhere. And one of those places that he's led is, you know, maybe he can perform Jamaicanness. Maybe that's a thing that he can actually latch onto. And we see how, you know, how well he does at that. And so as he's going through these different moments in time where people are, you know, getting these various answers from him, it's like he's this chameleon in a sense, but he can only really hold a particular, I don't know, color if we're going with the chameleon metaphor, for so long. You know, it can work for a little bit until, you know, the next questioner comes in and says, but, you know, I thought if you belong to this group, then I thought they did it this way, you know, or and so that's where this like idea of being in flux with his identity is coming in.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And, you know, not only does he perform Jamaicanness, but then he starts to perform Black, which is like, you know, the African American thing, you know, and because he asked his mother, are we Black? And she doesn't really give him an answer, or she, you know, she gives an answer, but it's not a yes or no answer, right?
Yeah, you're right, exactly. It's well, let me tell you about this this vague family tree.
Right, because she herself is probably confused about this idea that she's encountering as a new immigrant, like of what it is to be Black. And I love this sort of it's funny, but it's also kind of twisted, you know, that the mom's her, you know, her reaction to his prom date being this dark-skinned Dominican girl who's like the color of like coffee, right? And she's like runs in the room and locks herself and doesn't talk to the girl, locks herself away and doesn't talk to the girl. And then later on she says, well, you better not date a white girl. Like what these mixed messages that she
all of these she lists everyone basically, and it's like, you better not date anyone apparently, or at least that's how Trelawney's interpreting this. I wanted to make sure that even as she, you know, is this kind of new arrival to the US is unprepared to answer Trelawney's questions, that people are, you know, in their own sense, they're posing from a place of ignorance and a lot of assumptions or presumptions about, you know, who it is that they want to spend their time around and who's of value to spend their time around. I didn't want to let, you know, the family off the hook as well, that they don't have their own sets of prejudices and all of that. No one is let off the hook in this book.
Well, you know, that's one way of saying it, but the other way of saying it is that at the same time, no one is not humanized and given some compassion too, you know, which is the beautiful thing about it. And I'll get to some of that later, but that's you just so beautifully, Jonathan. Do you know the writer Teju Cole's work at all? I'm terrible with names. If I hadn't prepared this question, I wouldn't remember it either. So it's Open City and
Open City.
And Tremor is a book out now, which I haven't read yet. But he has a great book of essays that you should check it out, called Black Paper. And he talks exactly about the experience of like Black immigrants having to learn how to become Black.
Right.
Because and like he talks about how Obama had to learn how to become Black, and Jamaicans in New York, and Eritreans in DC, and Haitians in Florida, and, you know, Ghanaians in the Bronx. We all have to learn how to become Black, and that's something I grew up in the Bahamas, which is a predominantly Black country, which might sound very strange to any American to hear, but even though it's a predominantly Black country, I did not grow up with a conception of myself being Black. That just wasn't even necessary, because everyone was Black, so that wasn't even an identity. You know, of course, it wasn't like I had delusions about what color I was, but as an identity, it didn't make any sense. So you really explore this so well and so thoroughly in your book.
Yeah, I mean, it's and I think there's an understanding in talking to people emigrating from other nations, and just how, in Miami, where I grew up, I felt like I was in this in between space in a sense, because I had these
Mhm.
Jamaican parents. Once I came into a little bit more of a understanding in my teenage years of understanding of the culture and the value of it, I was very, very kind of proud to be a Jamaican American. But seeing these conversations about Black immigrants having a bit of like the learning period of
Yeah,
of what Blackness is supposed to mean in this country, and having never really walked around with that identity, because, as you said, you never had to. It's not. It's to me, it sheds a light on the way America has racialized things, racialized people in ways that, um, you're a country that's a majority Black country obviously isn't going to do that. And so there's,
yeah,
sometimes when we talk about like these diaspora wars,
yeah,
like, I think we have to talk about the fullness of, the fact that if you're in a place that's already treating you, you may have other issues, you may have class issues, you may see
exactly.
color issues,
Definitely, yeah,
you've got all kinds of other issues, but um, the treatment of Blackness is not going to be the same.
yeah, absolutely. There's an incident in this story in Flux where Trelawney's teacher thinks that he's plagiarized his essay because it seems too sophisticated for someone like him to have written.
Mhm.
And when I read that, I realize, of course, that Trelawney is a fictional character, and although we are sometimes may think, well, is this a doppelganger for Jonathan Escoffery, the author himself? Maybe a little bit fictionalized, maybe not. But it did occur to me I wondered, because this is such a common thing that happens, I wondered if this happened to you.
Yeah, I mean, this is something. My response to it happening wasn't the same as Trelawney's response, probably for the best. But yeah, it was definitely something that happened to me. Um,
What was your response?
I mean, my response was to dumb it down, but in a much less humorous way than Trelawney does. But it was a thing where I didn't necessarily understand it, and even now it's kind of like, well, was it purely about this teacher's assumptions about Black students and their capabilities of their
Mhm.
proficiency with language, or
Yeah,
what exactly was it? And I didn't, my experience, again, when your parents are not from the country, so they're not from they have no experience with the school system that you're going through. I didn't feel like I had a lot of places to turn with that kind of thing. And so my response was to write, a less good paper that
and
made the
you went
same
along.
points,
You
but
said
like
it was- yeah,
is,
yeah,
you can make it, just because he wasn't going to accept it otherwise.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow.
There's no,
Well, there
no
you go.
there was no going to anyone in the administration. There was no,
Yeah.
yeah, I yeah, I'll leave.
Although in the final story, if I survive you, Trelawney does have a moment of like getting back a little bit by
Yeah,
reporting the
yeah,
school on that.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Bringing that detail
Yeah,
back
yeah,
in a way, with, unfortunately, are sometimes racist people in positions of power. I say sometimes,
I was
often.
gonna say, really? I didn't that's believe
uh,
it.
yeah, I mean, mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I'm later on I can tell you privately, but I mean, I'm still traumatized from this. Happened to me in college, and a teacher gave me a C plus for a paper that she gave me an F, and then I argued with her, and she ended up C plus, but basically accused me of plagiarizing because I couldn't have written it, because it was an A plus paper, and she didn't believe it. And but I know this. I have other friends who this happened to, and this happened at like a Wesleyan University. This
Mhm.
this stuff.
I had I had a professor in my undergrad who um, brought in the exemplary paper and passed it around. And so when I met with him in my office hours, I said,
Yeah.
"Look, but my paper is better than this. Why did I get
Good for you.
why did I get a B plus and this is our A plus paper?" And he sat there and he read it, and so he was like, "Okay, give me a minute." He looked up, he was like, okay, yeah. He's like, "I see your point and you're right, but I look at her and I look at you and I just don't see an A student."
Whoa.
And he said that I'm not going to change your grade. But I'll think about it more when I look at your work, and and I wound up getting an A in the class, but he said to my face, "I look at
I just don't see an A student.
and you
Wow.
don't look to me like an A student." And that was, much worse than what happened to me in high school.
Yeah. Oh my God. That's
And I have other stories, but I know we have to move on.
yeah. I mean, I'm sure we could go on. So there was a point in the same story where you have the Trelawney in college now, and he's having a discussion with some other Black college students about the idea of Black responsibility in the 21st century, and about Black artists and how they should show up. And Trelawney, very, very well put, has a statement that's very well put. He says, I don't create characters. If I don't create characters who look like me, who will, right? Visibility is important. Otherwise, it's as if we don't exist. So I agree 100% with that. And, obviously, I even wrote a novel based on that idea. So I can't say that I don't agree with you, but I want a sense of, to what degree do you feel a sense of responsibility to show up as a Black artist? Or do you feel any responsibility to show up in a certain way as a Black artist?
Yeah, I don't know if responsibility is the word that I feel. I always, and I've said this before, so maybe this is me. I don't know, returning to my script. I tend not to have much of a script, but I remember the first time I came across Langston Hughes's essay, the Negro Artist and the Racial Mountain.
The mountain, yeah.
And just the way he breaks down, it's like, if I want to actually explore my own full humanity, the full humanity of characters who may look, some approximation of like me,
Yeah.
then I will explore. Race will be one of the components that I'm exploring as my characters deal with other things. I've heard Percival Everett say, I don't wake up. It's not that I wake up at 6:30 in the morning. My alarm goes off, and I say, "I am a Black man." It's like you're human. You've got all these different aspects of yourself, I think that is the reason why Black immigrants aren't thinking about that. It's not until they come into this contact with this kind of anti-Black majority culture,
Exactly.
where you have to think about your Blackness. But as it stands, if my books are going to continue to be set in the United States, then I'm probably going to, if I'm writing any kind of realism, I'm going to have to contend with race and what kind of bodies are my characters walking around in, period.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a struggle to, like, Toni Morrison, who, of course, is God. She has a great way of saying that, definitions are for the definers, not the defined. And so, these definitions of race and Black, they don't really serve us. They only serve the people who want to define us. And as you said, the new immigrants don't come in already having with that definition. But contending with that, speaking of Toni Morrison, also, she made a point of excluding sort of the white gaze as she wrote. And I find that a struggle to do when you write about contemporary life, Black person in contemporary America, because it's so there all the time. I find. I don't know. What do you think? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've never, with few exceptions, I've rarely, I should say, lived in a place where I was like I was part of like the majority racial demographics of the place. I lived in Atlanta for like 9 months, so that was maybe
Right. Yeah.
It was a good, for me personally. It was a really good 9 months.
Oh, great.
But I've always had to contend with living in either very multicultural, multiracial cities, or just generally in cities where I was among the minority, or I was one of the I was going to be minoritized either way. But I think as a result of that, because Toni Morrison would create these communities that were largely living apart from white people.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I maybe at some point I'm going to come to that. What I tend to write about is I don't think so. I was reading something. I was reading someone writing about my book today, just randomly, because I needed a piece of information.
Yeah.
So I did the thing where you read more than you actually had to.
Yeah.
And this might have been for the New Yorker review of my book or something like that. But I think the white characters were described as, I don't know, almost like background, or almost like not that significant. And for most of the book, and to some extent I agree with that. I think that I wanted to, again, not have this cast that's like all Black characters, but deal with the fact that I grew up in a city. I grew up in Miami, and it's like I couldn't see a city where I couldn't see creating a setting where it's like these like stock white American characters who I just didn't, like, for the most part, didn't grow up with, or even around for the most part. But I also, even as I'm talking about these Jamaican characters and this family, it didn't really feel like real to me to create, or it just wasn't within my interest, I suppose, to kind of falsely create this enclave that didn't deal with other cultures and didn't deal with people of other races. And so I don't know. I think I think experience has a lot to do with the way I write.
Yeah. And I somewhat disagree with that assessment from the New York interview, that part of it, because I think you do a great job of making full round characters of all of the people, and even the woman Morgan in the last story. Morgan is her name, right?
Yep.
That's a real person that I mean, you could make a movie from just that last story. It's like there's so much there. We could have a whole hour talking and breaking down that last story, but we don't have time. And speaking of time, we have about 10 more minutes left, and so I'm going to let the audience know that we're going to have a Q&A in a few minutes. I'm going to ask a couple more questions, and so if you have any questions for Jonathan, please type them into your chat, and I will happily be able to ask questions to Jonathan. So Jonathan, I want to say there's so much I want to talk to you about this, and we're going to run out of time. But I want us to give you one more congratulations about something that I was super impressed with. And I really want to think, I think it's a stroke of literary genius that you chose the second person voice to tell a story that could have been told from the first person. It could have been I, but you chose to say you. Right. And what that does for me, and probably I'll ask my question about this, but what it does for me is that it removes the narrator from himself somewhat. He's always looking at himself. And so we as readers have this experience of of what it's like always looking at yourself. And it reminds me of the W.E.B. Du Bois idea of double consciousness, and how as a Black person, we're always looking at ourselves through the eyes of others. And he says, like, measuring our soul by the tape, by the tape of a world that looks on and amused and contempt and pity. How did you come to use this you? Oh, and one more thing I want to praise you about. I think it's literarily, it's amazing also, because what you've done with that is taken the form and content, married the form and the content. So in the actual form of what you're saying, you're giving the experience of the thing you're talking about. But I think that's genius. Genius.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You probably phrased it better than anything I could say, so I appreciate that.
But what was your thinking about choose that voice? Did it come organically? How did that happen?
Yeah, thinking about Du Bois, there's so many different ways to look at it. Yeah, he's constantly looking at himself, but the reason he has to do that is as a means of safety, and thinking about, well, what is the rest of the world seeing when they see me? Am I a threat? Am I somehow acceptable? Am I this like Black with an asterisk that both keeps me on the inside and outside of things? So I absolutely agree with that. I had an interesting conversation just a couple days ago with someone, just thinking about like what even feels natural to me. I think if I am thinking about bad choices I've made in life, often that person feels like a different person from me, because it's like, well, I have the sense not to make that mistake right now. But last year when I did it, or last week when I did it, like I don't know who that guy is. But it's easy to point the finger, like, you made a mistake, Jonathan, why did you do that to us?
Yeah.
It feels more natural to me than I use that you referring to myself in my own head more than I've had the experience of. I may walk into a supermarket and see other people and say, that person, him or they. But I don't know. I don't look over and then suddenly I'm in the mind of that person who is trying to figure out how to pick a ripe mango. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then he, thought back on his grandmother when she taught him. You know what I mean? Like, that to me is the most foreign point of view of all. And so, I mean, I'll leave it at that, just because there's so many little time.
Right. So I know this might take a long time, but briefly, I think some people have some people have the illusion that, as writers, like, we sit down and we write a book, and we, maybe it takes a while to keep on writing, and then we send it into an editor, and someone says, oh, I love this, and then they publish it, and then you're in the New York Times and getting rave reviews. But you and I know that's a very, very different story. If you could tell us a little bit about what was your journey to getting published?
It was a long journey. When I was in my, how do I put this? A little bit before going off to grad school, I did an MFA. I got the art degree, master's degree. And a little bit before that, I felt very desperate to be publishing short pieces. I was writing a lot of poetry at the time, and I think I might have landed a poem or two in small outlets, but my fiction wasn't landing. And so I knew I needed more education, not just about writing, but also like the literary landscape and, the magazine landscape and what, editors are looking for and all of that. Some of which I got in grad school, some of which I got afterwards, working at a place like Grub Street, which is a nonprofit in Boston. And even though I was hearing some discouraging things about what it would take to put out a story collection, as I started to actually publish stories, this is after grad school now, people in publishing started to look for the book. And so for me, being a story writer who was putting work out into the world year by year by year, that's what started to get a lot of attention. Especially when I published with the Paris Review and won their Plimpton Prize, and then editors were looking for me.
Great. So we have a question here that I'm going to read to you from Albert. It says, "Thank you both. This is a great book talk. Can you make a statement about the current rash of book bans in the U.S. and why do you think this is happening now?"
I mean, it's terrible. It's horrible. It's one of the worst things that it's especially being done to young people, because it's young people. It's schools where these books are being banned, for the most part. Public schools. It's related. I mean, as someone who's from Florida, I can't really separate it from this whole ban on words. You can't say gay in the classroom. You can't teach anything resembling reality about race, both in the contemporary sense or in a historical way. And I don't know, I was reminded of a question I was asked back in 2022 about like how we appeared to be moving in the right direction, which is just so ironic now thinking about this. It's this backlash. I think we had this moment in 2020 where I think a lot of us were a lot of Black people were skeptical about the pledges that were being made to that the country was going to do better, that people in power were going to do better, and then this is the I think it's the backlash that always comes. We saw the backlash to President Obama's presidency and administration. Anytime we make any kind of perceived progress, we receive a kind of violent backlash. But if there's any positive things to be taken, I spent a very short time in Mississippi last year, and then I was just in Florida. And there are movements to counter these measures, and so I don't think all is lost, and I think we can turn it around. We just need to make our voices as loud as possible and continue to do that in the places where it counts, which is more conservative states.
Yep. We have time for maybe one or two more questions here. We have a question here from Brian Alessandro, who is actually a host on this show often. So your book has an elegant and thoughtful structure, almost like an episodic novel. Do you believe, as many psychologists do, that fiction has the potential to enhance empathy?
I mean, the short answer is yes, I do. I think I think for a lot of us more sensitive artist types. But again, if you for whatever reason, whatever part of your identity, you're a kind of minoritized voice, oftentimes you've had to think outside of yourself. And for those who and that doesn't mean just because you're, just because I'm Black doesn't mean I get everything right about race, without, thinking very, long and hard about these things. But I think reading can help you definitely see perspectives that maybe you haven't thought about. I think the bar though is maybe different for different people. For more privileged people, the various privileges that one may have. Reading books by people who maybe don't have those particular privileges, I think it can really do a good job of making you more empathetic.
Thank you, Jonathan. So we have one more question that I have time to read here, and this is from Eves. It says, "What are you both working on now?"
What are you working on?
Yeah. I heard that this is not a question to ask Jonathan Escarfi because he makes up stuff. He says, right? You've made up stuff before.
I have made up stuff, and I don't know if it's the smartest move, because then people will run with the stuff that you've made up. I feel like my next book is like my secret weapon book, so you can't really let them know your next move. But I have also got like a sci-fi, a couple, actually two sci-fi projects going simultaneously. Um, because I want to branch out into that world. I love the possibilities for. I love that leaving the world of realism, you can imagine a way forward in a way that is maybe more freeing and for not just me as like the artists, but also for like us as a people.
Yeah.
Interpret that however you want to interpret it. I think there's just really beautiful ways to see paths forward, and even address history in ways that you know, pure hardcore realism is just maybe less equipped to do.
Yeah, well, there's Octavia Butler and
Exactly.
and Delaney, um, and even one of our closer to us, our peers is Matteo Escapari's coming out with a new book that's fantasy.
Okay, I'm
Way
aware of it. I didn't know that. I didn't know it
Yeah,
was
yes, totally. So he's making that turn too. Yeah, but I think it's one of the questions that we as writers, I think, hate to get asked, and yet I think we have to appreciate it and hear it in the terms of sort of enthusiasm in eagerness to hear more from us, and as sort of uh, a voice of showing like, hey, we're waiting for what you have. We like what you have, and we're waiting. And I'm definitely waiting myself for what the next work is of Jonathan Escoffery's. And no pressure, Jonathan, because I'm not expecting it to be great. You already did that, so now you can do something wild and crazy. And I know that you're smart and brilliant, and it's going to just be interesting anyway. So
I really appreciate that.
So I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in and listening tonight. I've had a great time talking to Jonathan. I, have a million more questions I could ask him, and but we don't have time for that. And it's been so great speaking to you, Jonathan. Finally, thank you so much.
Likewise, really, really wonderful. Thank you for putting thought into your questions and this conversation. And we did it. We finally did it.
You did it. I got to come out there in California because I don't know when you're coming to New York again, but let me know.
Yeah, I might be there in May. I will. I should be in New York in May, but yeah, come out to Cali.
All right. So thank you, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this evening as much as I have, listening and talking with Jonathan Escoffery. And thanks again to Daniel Zaleski, who is the creator and the guy in charge here at Culture Connection and the Queens Public Library. Thank you so much, and good night, everyone. Thank you.